Welcome to the Milwaukee Public Library, Central Library, and our Polar Express 30th Anniversary Celebration with Chris and Allsburg. Thank you all for coming out today during our first snowfall of the season. A part of me has to feel like the snow was perfectly timed just for our event today. I want to extend a thank you to the Lionel Railroad Club of Milwaukee for joining us with their excellent model trains today, including a Polar Express. Artists working in education for creating a superb art project inspired by Chris and Allsburg's artwork. And Justin McCullough and Jeffrey Gold are running the chess program over there, so thank you to them as well. And life-size chess was generously donated for our use today by St. Sebastian's School Chess Club. Also, a special thank you to Boswell Book Company for co-hosting the event with us. If you didn't get a book yet, they still have plenty back there available, so feel free to stop back there before we finish up. After Mr. Van Allsburg's presentation, there will be a brief question and answer session, and following that, we will explain the book signing process. So Chris Van Allsburg has delighted us with beautifully detailed illustrations, creative charm, and rich imaginative stories for over 30 years. He grew up near Grand Rapids, Michigan, and while he didn't take art courses in high school, an interview with an admissions officer from the University of Michigan became a turning point in shaping his future. Good grades and interest in the College of A&D, which was architecture and design, a small fib, and a keen response to a question on Norman Rockwell would launch him into an undergrad full of art courses. From there, he went to the Rhode Island School of Design, pursuing his interest in sculpture. His wife, Lisa, an art teacher, and David McCauley, an author and illustrator, encouraged him to consider picture book illustrations. When his work was shared with an editor at Houghton Mifflin Company, he was encouraged to not only illustrate, but also to write, and we're so glad that he did. In 1979, he published his first book, The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, which received a Caldecott honor in 1980. In 81, he published Jumanji, which won the Caldecott Award. And when he published The Polar Express in 1985, he once again received the prestigious Caldecott Medal. All of his works are wonders to the eye and moving to the imagination. A quote on his website perfectly captures the essence of his tales. The idea of the extraordinary happening in the context of the ordinary is what's fascinating to me. And I think that's also what's fascinating in his books. I believe it is fair to say that the Polar Express has created a wonderful holiday tradition for many, has captured our hearts and our desires, no matter what our age is, to believe. Without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Chris Van Allsburg.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, good. I started illustrating and writing fairly late in my life, and was quite proud when I finished my first book. It was called The Garden of Abdul Ghazazi, and I remember delivering it up to my publisher and feeling that the work was done, the hard work was done. And they said, "Oh no, Chris, the hard work is just beginning, because now we have to sell it." And I didn't know that authors participated in that effort, that I would be selling my book along with my publisher. And what that means is that publishers are often asking their authors to hit the road. So I've been hitting the road. Happy to say this is almost my last stop. Because the weather's getting worse, and it's going to be hard to get home. But anyway, great to be here in Milwaukee. When I started doing these little talks, and I would talk to kids, and I would talk to mixed groups with adults too, I tried to find something to talk about that would interest everyone, and I sort of stuck with the questions I got asked most, and I would just answer those, and those questions were probably not a surprise to you. Any idea what kind of question do you think I got asked the most? Any ideas? Do I want to add more stuff to my book? Well, that's an interesting question, because usually when I finish a book, I feel that there should be something more, but it's too late. What do you think? Well, that's a suggestion. I should make more books so I can make more children happy. I can't argue with that. I'm not going to argue with that. But what kind of question do you think people, you meet an artist, an author, somebody who makes something, and you say, what could I ask that person? What do you think? Maybe I should make a different book. Well, that will happen soon too, but the question, okay, here's one.
Do you know Santa?
Yes, one short meeting, but a memorable one. Won't forget. So the question I get asked, I won't keep you in suspense any longer. Where do you get your ideas? And that's the question I think artists get asked most frequently. So I'm going to try to answer that, at least with a few different books. The other question I got asked often was, well, how did you end up doing this? When did you know you wanted to do this? Why did you choose this? It's a strange thing to become an artist when you're young and you make things, you play with finger paints and stuff like that. It's fun, it's natural. The idea that you could do something like that for the rest of your life seems strange. It seems, could you be that lucky? So I'm going to describe to you a little bit about how I became an artist, and I'm going to talk a little bit about where my ideas come from. So when I was a young person, like your age, I loved the art days. When the teacher would bring out the art materials, or the visiting art teacher would come, the finger paints, we'd make little things out of clay, and then we'd let them dry, and then we'd get to glaze them, and a week later the teacher would bring them back in, and we had these little things that we would take home, or these little things that we would make for our parents, and they would glue to the refrigerator for a while. All that was really terrific, and I remember that as being my favorite thing in elementary school. But when I got a little older, I went to junior high school. When I went to high school, I had sort of lost contact with art. I didn't stay interested in it. I didn't take art when I was in high school. And as my introducer suggested to you, I got into art school. See, when you get done with high school, you go to another thing called college, and then you really get an education. And so I was going to college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do in college. Now, this high school that I went to in Grand Rapids, way back then, when college wasn't maybe quite as big a deal or quite as fraught with challenge, they would actually send someone from the University of Michigan to my high school, and we would have an interview. We would sit down and talk with him. He would look at your transcript, your grades, and at the end of the interview, he would say, "Welcome to the University of Michigan," or he would say, you know, "Better luck next time." So I went to this interview, and there was an admissions form that I had to fill out, and one of the things you were asked to do on the admissions form was to identify what you wanted to do when you got to the school, what you wanted your major to be, what you were interested in. And I didn't know. I was 17 and didn't really have a clue, and hadn't completed the form, and the interviewer said, "Gosh, Chris, well, what do you want to do when you get to college? You haven't expressed any interest." And I said, "Well, give me that form back. Let me look at that again." And so he handed me back the form, and I was looking at it, and there was a school that was simply called School of A&D, and I didn't know what that meant. You know, aardvarks and dragons. I don't know. A&D, what could that be? And he said, "That's architecture and design. That's the art school." And so something miraculous sort of happened in my head, and I'm not sure why it happened then. I'm not sure why it happened so quickly. But I looked at that piece of paper, and I was looking at this art school, and it suddenly dawned on me that I could go to college, I could get a bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan doing finger paint and making little pinch pots. And I thought, that's a low-stress way to get a degree. And I remembered how much fun it was too. Well, what great fun it was to make things. And so I looked at that and I thought about it for about 5 seconds and I said, well, you know what? I think I'd like to go to the art school. I'd like to become an art major. And so he looked at my transcript, which showed all the things I'd studied in high school, and there was not a single art course there. So he said, Chris, there's a problem here. You haven't studied art. I can't very well let you into the art school. And so I said to him, and I'm not sure why I felt so determined, because usually when you feel very strongly about something, it's because you've been thinking about it for a long time. I've been thinking about being an artist for about 5 seconds, but I felt really strongly about it. And so I said to the interviewer, I said, of course there's no art on my transcript because I study privately on the weekends. And furthermore, I'd set up a small sculpture studio on my front porch where I carved marble on the weekends. And there was nothing more fun for me than to chip a little stone on Saturday and Sunday. He'd never met anyone who did that, and he was impressed enough to let me into the University of Michigan as an art student. That year, 1967, was the final year that the University of Michigan would admit students into the art school without a portfolio. So I was lucky because I didn't have a portfolio. I had nothing to show. So I went to the University of Michigan, and when I got there, when I got to Ann Arbor, I found I was surrounded by students who actually had been studying privately on the weekends. And they were really good. And it was a shock to me. And I believed that they could draw so well because they were born with that skill. I didn't know that you actually could learn how to draw that well. And I believed that I wasn't born with that skill. And so I seriously thought that I would have to leave. I wouldn't be an artist. I would be something else. And I would have to transfer to a different school, college, in the university. But then at the end of the freshman year, something really terrific happened to me. And I took a course called The Introduction to Sculpture. I couldn't draw like all of my other fellow students, but when I was a young boy, I was an absolutely standout model maker. I built model boats, built model planes, cars. I remember one summer my parents made an offer to me. They said, would you like to go off to summer camp, overnight camp, this year? And I thought, well, maybe, but I had a better idea. I said, there's this great model of the Cutty Sark, which is a clipper ship, a sailing boat. And the model was about this big. It was about half the size of, I was this tall, the model was this tall, this big. And I said to my parents, well, I could go to summer camp, but I'd rather build this model boat instead. Which meant that I would spend the summer in the basement by myself building this boat. And my parents, who were unconcerned about my social development, said, well, if that's really what you want, Chris, we'll get you the boat. So they got the big model of the clipper ship, and I went into my basement and built this boat, did a really terrific job with it. All summer long, I imagined myself as a tiny little sailor on the deck of this boat and sailing the high seas. So it was a great experience for me. Did not develop my social skills in the basement, but I rediscovered that talent when I was in college. That last semester, second semester of a freshman introduction to sculpture, suddenly I knew what I could do. I was really good with my hands. I could make things. And so that was a turning point for me. I realized that I could be an artist, I could be a sculptor. So I'm going to show you some pictures of things that I made when I was in college, and give you an idea about the kind of sculpture I made and sort of how that led me to becoming a picture maker and a storyteller. So where did I put that? Oh, they're tiny, aren't they? All right, so can you see this? Is the AV person around? That makes it bigger? Yeah. I guess that's it. I hope you can see it. I'll describe it to you a little bit. This is called Obelisk in a Strong Wind. And it's actually bigger than this in real life. It's about so tall. It's made out of little bricks of rosewood. And I was interested as a sculptor in the idea of making time stop. So I could make something and then it wouldn't happen. It was about to happen, but it wouldn't happen. So this is Obelisk in a Strong Wind. This is the Titanic sinking. Once again, I was able to stop it from sinking. Saved all people on board. This is made out of bronze. This is the companion piece. If you're way far away, this is the iceberg in case you can't see from way back there. So, the AV person is not here, right? No. Nobody here? Oh. Here she comes. Oh. Can you make this big? They're quite small. Is there a way to fill this screen? How's it looking? Oh, okay, now it's a little high. Now, you want to lower this? All right, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption. This is called Ball Coming to a Skidding. Ball coming to a. Ball coming to a skidding stop on a checkered carpet. Sometimes sculptures, it's about important things, like it's about, somebody who won a battle, and it's a soldier on top of a horse with a sword. This is simply a sculpture about a ball that came to a skidding stop on a carpet. These are the Invisible Men bookends. Can you see the Invisible Man? Yes? Yes. Some people can, some people can't. This is event at the observatory. It's actually it's a pretty good sized piece. It's an observatory that has a flying saucer lodged in its All right, I'm sorry that these aren't a little clear, but this is a design for a chair factory. It's actually made out of cherry and walnut. It's pretty good size, a little bit bigger than an ordinary chair. Not very comfortable. I don't know if you can see all the details in it. Often when you display furniture like this, you put little signs on it that says, "Please do not sit." But I've never had to do that when I exhibit this piece. Okay, so this is a drawing. This is not sculpture. This is called The Impatient Dinner Guest. He's quite hungry, isn't he? He's eating his plate, yeah. Yeah, he's very impatient. So I was making sculpture and moved into a new studio, and I was surprised to find that the landlord of this new studio was in the habit of turning the heat off at 5 in the afternoon. I was in the habit of working late into the night because the creative fires burn all night long when you're 26. So I couldn't work. You can't make sculpture wearing mittens, so I had to find a hobby, and I just decided my hobby would be drawing pictures. So these were the kind of pictures that I drew. they were pictures a lot like this. They were pictures that seemed kind of mysterious, like how hungry do you have to be to do that? And what was the woman's reaction? So there's a little bit of a story here, but not much. But I drew a number of pictures like this, maybe 10 of them. And my wife encouraged me to share these with some publishers up in Boston and in New York because she used picture books in her work. She was an elementary school art teacher, and she brought home a bunch of picture books for me to look at as a way of sort of making me think about these as picture book illustrations. But all the books she brought home were quite brightly colored. The drawings appeared to have been done by illustrators who believed a good picture book looked as if it had been done by a child. And so I said to my wife, I don't think so. This doesn't look like book illustration to me. But anyway, she took them to some publishers, and I was very surprised. She came back and said, Chris, they like your work. They like your work so much, they sent these stories, and they want you to think about illustrating them. And I said, well, that's a big surprise to me. And so I read some of the stories, and they were stories a little bit like this. They were stories about Little Bunny's first day going to kindergarten. And Little Bunny was in a really worried state because Little Bunny didn't know if he was going to have to share his carrots with the other little bunnies. Little Bunny was worried if his backpack was as nice as the other bunnies' backpacks. So it was all about Little Bunny's problems and anxieties, and the other stories were like that. So I read these manuscripts that I'd been given by the publishers, and I had to basically respectfully decline because I didn't think I could draw the bunnies with the backpacks and the kittens on ice skates and things like that. So I thought that was the end of the story for me, and I went back to my sculpture studio, continued to make things, but one of the editors that saw the work wouldn't give up on me, and he called me up and he said, listen, I understand why you don't want to draw kittens in ice skates and things like that. If you want to be able to draw the kinds of things you want to draw, there's only one solution, and that's you have to write the stories yourself. And I said to him that the longest thing I'd written since high school was a postcard to my mom. And he said, I think you can do it. So I put a little time aside, and oh, here's some other pictures I drew. This is a dog that's disappearing except for the dots. This is a dog where the dots are leaving, but the dog stays behind. It was a little dark, hard to see. So anyway, yeah. There's the dog. So here's this was how I became a storyteller. My first experience. I've been drawing pictures of topiary gardens. These are the gardens that look like animals. Can you tell what this is? So what's this right here? Anybody? Any guess? Yeah. A dragon? Yeah, maybe. What? Yeah, okay. So that was, I was still, you know, I was a sculptor, I was making drawings of topiary gardens. They didn't look at this style, but I decided to draw this topiary garden, and then I put a little white dog in it. And after I put the little white dog in the garden, then I drew the little boy chasing him. So now I felt like I had something that was more than just a picture. It was a little bit like the man chewing his plate. There was a story here, but I didn't know what it was. So I started to ask myself some questions, and the question was, well, why is the dog running away? Why is the boy chasing him? You already know the answer. Yeah. Okay. That's okay. I'm going to tell him anyway. So it's a bad dog. It's a mischievous dog, and the boy is chasing him. And the other question that I had to answer is, who made this very strange garden? So as I started to answer these questions, I established characters. The dog was mischievous. The boy was very dutiful, very responsible, and very worried about the dog because it was not his dog. He was simply a dog sitter. And the garden belonged to a retired magician whose name was Abdul Gazazi. So I had these characters. I had this event. And so I started asking more questions. Well, what happened? Well, the dog got loose. The boy chased the dog. The dog ran into the forbidden garden, and the boy had to chase him into the forbidden garden, and he lost track of the dog, and then he finally goes to the magician's manor house. The magician greets him, and the magician announces that I've turned, because I hate dogs, especially in my garden, I've turned your dog into a duck. Bad news. So the boy takes the duck, and he goes home, but he loses control of the duck because the duck flies away. And so now he's in a special big trouble because not only did the dog get turned into a duck, but now he doesn't even have the duck that was a dog. So he has to go back to the woman who he was dog sitting for and report the bad news. Now I won't tell you exactly how it ends, but I'll tell you this, that it has a good ending for the boy, but it's a mysterious ending because when you get to the ending, you don't know if the magician was playing a trick on the boy, namely just telling him, that duck is your dog. It may or may not have been, but the boy believed it. Or was the magician a real magician, like a Harry Potter kind of magician who really could turn dogs into ducks? So I got to that last page and I thought, well, how should it end? And I decided, well, it did end. That's it. So I written a book that had a story that didn't have a real ending. And it was in black and white, and it was big, and it was, in my opinion, probably a surefire failure in the children's book world, and not even confident that my publisher, who'd encouraged me to write it, would even be willing to print it. But I delivered it, all done, and my editor said, love it, Chris, terrific. And they printed about 7,000 copies, and I was sure that they would sell about 500. The other 6,500 would be available to me at a very reduced price, and I would have Christmas and birthday gifts for all my friends for life. But much to my surprise, the book was well received, and it actually got a Caldecott Honor Medal. And I didn't even, to give you a measure of how naive I was or how little I knew about children's illustration, I wasn't even sure what a Caldecott medal was, but my publisher clued me in quite quickly, and when he did, then I felt really great. Went back to the sculpture studio, thought, okay, I did my book, great, I won, I even got a little medal for it, and so that's off my bucket list. You know, now I have to do something else. But I started thinking, well, if that was the first one I tried and people liked it, and I was happy with it too, maybe I should try it again. So I wrote this story, Jumanji, and it was inspired by a fairly simple idea, and it's called cognitive dissonance. That's can you say that? Can you say cognitive dissonance? Okay, very good. You will impress your teacher if you're able to use that word in the coming weeks at school. You tell your teacher that's an example of cognitive dissonance, and what is it? It's when you've got something that's very familiar to you, in this case, a dining room, and something that's also kind of familiar because you see it in magazines, you see a rhinoceros. But how many times do you see a rhinoceros in the dining room? You see that? Zero times. So that's cognitive dissonance. You got something you've recognized, you know that. You got something else you recognize, you know that. You put them together, you have this dissonance. And it creates a kind of a mystery, a kind of like a, what's going on there? So that was the idea for Jumanji, and then I combined that with another idea that I had, which was based on the disappointment I felt as a child playing board games. Because when you play a board game, you play Monopoly with your mom and dad. Yeah, so you get a hotel on Boardwalk, your mom lands on it, and she's bankrupt. And you feel really good about that. But it's not real. It doesn't last. So I had this idea, what about a board game where everything that happened on the board really happened? So I combined that with this idea of, jungle animals inside the house. So obviously it would be a jungle game. And so that was the sort of the inspiration for Jumanji. So because we don't have as much time as I ordinarily like to take, I'm going to describe another idea of a process of inspiration and where ideas came from with this title right here, this book right here. When my daughter was 3 years old, she had a lot of coloring books, and one of them was a Walt Disney coloring book, a Peter Pan coloring book. And in Peter Pan, there's a character named Princess Tiger Lily. Have you heard of Princess Tiger Lily? Yes, yes. So Princess Tiger Lily, in the coloring book, she'd fallen into a pond, and she didn't know how to swim. Yeah, so she was frightened, and in the coloring book, she was doing this because she was scared. And Peter was off in the distance. You could see he was flying toward her, and Peter was going to save her, but for that period, she was really scared. When I picked up the coloring book off my daughter's floor, I'd seen that she'd taken crayons, purple, green, yellow crayons, and she'd done this to Princess Tiger Lily. And so when I looked at the picture of her doing this, I thought she was doing that because of what my daughter had done with the crayons. That she'd just done this, and Princess Tiger Lily was so upset. So that made me thinking, well, what if there was a world that you lived in and you were a coloring book character? You lived in the world of a coloring book, but the coloring book was brand new and it was still in the toy store or the bookshop, and no one had opened it up yet. And so the world for the people in the coloring book is a normal, quiet world. Everything is the same each day. Everything is nice and white and black and clean and orderly. But then one day something happens in this coloring book. It's a cowboy coloring book. It's called Bad Day at Riverbend. And so what happens in the story is there's a sheriff. He's on the cover here. He's in his office, and a young boy comes to the sheriff's office, and he's knocking on the door, and something terrible has happened. And they call the sheriff out because the stagecoach has come into town, and the stagecoach driver is not there. He's missing. So he's gone. The stagecoach driver, who they've seen every day for eternity, is no longer on the stagecoach, and they're all really worried about it. And the sheriff has to go out and find the stagecoach driver. So he gets on his horse, and he goes out and he finds him. And this is what's happened to the stagecoach driver. Well, what do you think happened? He got scribbled. So what the characters in the book don't understand is that they live in a book. And now the book is owned by a young person who's starting to play with their crayons. So every day, something worse happens. And it goes downhill from here. Finally, the whole town is covered like this. And it's a disappointment for the characters who live there, but they have to learn to live with it because that's the way the world works. Zathura? Kind of a sequel to Jumanji. How much time do we have here? What are we looking at here?
Just go
No, but someone was going to tell me, give me a 5-minute warning. Was that you?
It's 2:35, sir.
2-minute warning? Okay, 2-minute warning.
No.
Zathura, this is sort of a sequel to Jumanji, except instead of the game board bringing the jungle to your house went to outer space. Queen of the Falls? Yeah, you know that. Yeah, so that's true. She does. When I was working on this book, I would go into classrooms and I'd talk to kids and I'd talk about this book and I'd say, I'm writing this story now. It's really amazing. It's about the first person to go over Niagara Falls. And they'd all go, wow. And so I would invite people to say, well, what kind of person would do a crazy thing like that? And they'd all say, oh, I don't know, some teenager, some daredevil, some muscle man, some crazy guy, and then And when they all got done with their ideas, trying to imagine the character, what kind of character would climb into a barrel and go over Niagara Falls, it was always a great kind of treat for me to tell them that it was somebody who was probably older than their teacher. It was a 62-year-old woman who climbed into a barrel, went over Niagara Falls, and lived to tell the story. So anyway, I wish I could tell you about all my books, but I got a train to catch later on and a lot of books to sign. Do we have time for like a few questions? What's the... a few questions? Okay, good. Right back here.
Did you ever get a chance to meet Robin Williams with anyone with the movie of Jumanji?
Question here was when the film got made, did I get to meet the principals, the people who were acting in it? And I did spend a little time with Robin Williams, not on the set because sets are kind of chaos and it's not much fun, but I spent a little time with him in New York City, just sort of, it actually wasn't talking about Jumanji, it was talking about a sequel to Jumanji and what he might be interested in doing, but did spend some time with him, a really sweet guy, and very calm. Yeah. When did I make Zathura? Zathura is probably about 4 or 5 years old now. It was also turned into a movie. A pretty good one. Didn't find the big audience that Jumanji did, but not a bad film. Let's see. Way back here. Yes, you. Do I have any new ideas? I do have lots of ideas all the time, and the problem for me when I've completed a project and want to start something else, I have a notebook with lots of ideas in it, and the thing that keeps me from getting to work is picking the one that's going to hold my interest the longest, because when I decide to do a book, I'm deciding what I'm going to do for the next 8 or 9 months. And it would be terrible to get in a couple months in and go back to my little notebook and say, you know what, I think I should have done the other one. But I got many ideas. Yeah, right there. What was the inspiration for the Polar Express? So the Polar Express, in sort of the same way that, you know, Jumanji started out with ideas about jungle animals, I started out with an idea of the Polar Express. It was a train. But the odd thing about the Polar Express was when I started to write it, I only wrote the first few words where I got to a point where I was convinced that it was not something I was making up, but it was something that I remembered. And I won't tell you the short amount of time that I spent writing that, because it was something that I came to believe happened to me when I was 8, and I didn't have to make it up. I only had to write down what I remembered. And what I remember is going to the North Pole when I was 8, and that's why I know Santa. Right back here, yeah.
You said that you were not an artist going into art school, but your illustrations are absolutely fabulous. So what was the transition from not being a drawing artist to being an artist?
Right, so the question here is I went into art school, didn't really know how to draw, didn't draw very well, was a little self-conscious about it. I did start drawing in college because I drew pictures of the sculptures that I would make. So I learned a little bit about drawing that way. Perspective, which is an important part of my drawings all the time, I taught myself. And I think what the reality was is that I was mistaken when I said artists are born, not made. There's truth to that. I think an important part of art is born, but it's possible to really develop drawing skills through practice, through education with good teachers. So mostly I just learned to draw by doing it. Lots of practice. So final question, I'm guessing. So let's go right back here. Yes, you. Number 21.
During your career, who were you inspired?
Okay, the question is, during my career, who was I inspired by? And as you remember, when I mentioned my wife, when she was trying to get me to think of my work as illustrations, she brought back a pile of books. And they were all books that were done about that time, in the 60s, early 60s, mid-60s. And I found none of them inspirational except for one little book that was about so big, and it made me believe that it was possible to make a picture book and make a picture book that was important to me in the same way that sculpture was important to me. That I didn't have to make a book that I was thinking about somebody else while I was doing it. Because a lot of the books that I saw, I really had the impression that it was an adult illustrator who was trying to imagine what a children wanted to read about or see. And I just wanted to do the thing I wanted to do, which was to draw the pictures I wanted to make. And I saw an example, one book that was an inspiration to me that I felt was like that, and that was a book called Higgledy Piggledy Pop, about this big, and it was by Marie Sendak, who was a real sort of inspiration to me, because his books always were art. They weren't things that were made to quickly entertain kids and stuff. Okay. So anyway, that's got to be the last question, because I got to sign your books, make my train. Thank you for coming.